Man, it wasn't supposed to be like this. It was not supposed to be like this. For the second straight year, it is like this. And on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we'll talk about what went wrong, where the Oilers go from here, and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very depressing, have I said it's going to be depressing, Stanley Cup loser edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This is my second straight Stanley Cup Finals loss as host of Locked On Oilers. I do want to thank everyone who is joining me on today's show, even though it is going to be a sad one. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, we are going to start with the Oilers being a very good team, but seeing the difference between a very good team and a great team over the course of this series and in this game tonight. We're going to pivot to talking about the Oilers' offensive limitations and why that's been an issue for two straight finals. And then in our final segment, we will tie a bow on game episodes for this season of Locked On Oilers. There will be further Stanley Cup Final analysis, and we'll start to pivot more towards the offseason at the start of next week. But with so much to unpack, I do want to start here, and this is going to be cheesy, but this is the hard part. This is the hard part, because for all of the progress it feels like the Oilers have made in the last few seasons, where they won as many playoff series last year just to get to the Stanley Cup Final as they had in the entirety of the Connor McDavid era prior to that point. They only had 3 playoff series wins in the previous years of McDavid's career, and last year they had 3. This year they had 3. 6 playoff series wins in 2 years is nothing to sneeze at. This team has been incredibly close each of the last 2 years, and you can pick to very obvious culprits. You can point this year to goaltending, to special teams, to depth. Last year, you could have pointed at the team's depth, their defense, and to a lesser extent, their goaltending than this year. But the Oilers are not a bad hockey team. Sure, they give us agita. They stress us out. It felt like they spent the entire regular season not taking the games particularly seriously, only to turn it on and give us all of this hope and make us feel that this year would be different. And I called into a show on Tuesday morning, and they had asked me, well, how do you feel about the game tonight? Are you nervous? What do you think is going to happen? And I said, I am cautiously pessimistic. Everything about this game, with the way the series has been trending, the way the last game went in particular, everything about it said the Panthers probably slowly choke the Oilers away and the game gets away from them. And I very stubbornly said, I think the Oilers have something special in them tonight. And I always knew it was going to take something special to make this happen to some extent, because when you're at this time of year and you are on the team that is clearly outgunned, and before the series started, I had said Florida was a more talented team. I felt their quality, especially at key positions like third line center and goalie, and their third defenseman, Nico Mikkola, all being well above the average of what you would expect for that position. And when your depth is that strong, they can take advantage of the little things. And that's really the key. Tonight's game was won on a handful of sequences, on mistakes, on breakdowns. And the Oilers did not play a particularly bad game tonight. If anything, you would say the Oilers definitely played better than they had on Saturday in front of Calvin Pickard. But tonight, you could see the moment made them jumpy. It made them skittish. And the mistakes that lead to the first 3 goals, while this was still a serious game, are varying degrees of inexcusable. That first goal Ekholm throws Bouchard an absolute grenade of a pass. Puck is skipping along. It's not scheduled. Bouchard's back is to where the play is developing behind him. So it's a blind pass. That's not a particularly good pass. Bouchard, knowing he's about to get blown up, tries to broom handle the puck along, hits it 2 feet, 3 feet, where it's intercepted. And Sam Reinhart, being an elite goal scorer, he had 50 last year. I know Zach did too, but Sam Reinhart, there's a reason he was one of the first 6 picked for Canada in the Olympic team next year. That's a tremendous hockey player. He doesn't need a whole lot to go his way if he's going to win his minutes. And when you have this much forward talent, and I want to do a real deep dive on this at some point in the next week or two. I really want to explore how good this goal scoring was in relation to some of the better teams we've seen over the last handful of years, compared to the Tampa Bay teams, that Vegas team that went 66-33 in the Stanley Cup, in their road to the Stanley Cup Final. And you sit here and you think about how good the Oilers played at various points in this playoff run. I mean, after game 1, I felt like we were going to win the whole thing. After game 1, to win in that respect, to really give themselves a shot in the arm and say, okay, we can hang with these guys, we can beat these guys. And then you lose game 2 the way you did in overtime, and you let game 3 get away from you. And Florida, to their credit, man, they play a very simple hockey game and they don't make a lot of mistakes. It makes them so difficult to play against. And I thought of this earlier while I was watching that game get away from me. That kind of felt like what it was playing the Seahawks when they first started being a serious football team in the mid-2010s with Russell Wilson and the Legion of Boom, where Russ wasn't doing a whole lot. He was running around. He was throwing a couple moon balls every game, but his numbers were never that good, and their defense would slowly but surely pick away at you, and their running game would slowly but surely pick away from you. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't the most efficient, but Florida, to their credit tonight, they won on those handful of sequences, and the Oilers could not manufacture what they needed tonight. They couldn't get the puck to dangerous areas. They really had a hard time establishing the offensive zone, getting more than one scoring chance per zone entry. And put it like this. The Oilers were outscored, while this was still a serious hockey game, and in the previous 5 games, 5-1 in the Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl minutes in the Stanley Cup Final, with them on the ice at the same time. If you are losing that percent of McDavid and Draisaitl together, what hope does the rest of your lineup have? And that's really where we're going to pivot to in our next segment, so I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. But the one last thought I did have, and just, the Panthers don't really have any weaknesses. That's really what's killing you. They're not great everywhere. You know, you can make an argument the Oilers on a man-by-man basis might have a better defense. I know after this series at large, that's going to sound crazy, but you could go guy by guy and make an argument that, you know, Jake Wallman is better than Nico Mikkola. And look, that's not the point. That's neither here nor there. But what I'm saying is the margin of error between these two teams, it's not that big. Yeah, it came across as big, but when you see the absolute highest end range of outcomes for this Panthers team, and even like okay or medium range outcomes for this Oilers team, you saw the difference manifest in 3 real ugly scores for the Oilers, and you got a lot of questions. We're going to talk more specifically about the offense and why I feel, even though the story coming out of the Stanley Cup Final will undoubtedly be the goaltending, I really feel like the Oilers offense missed the boat here and left up gains on the table, and frankly could have made this series a little bit closer. But we'll be right back after this quick break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it so easy to stay in the game before tip-off and after the game starts. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you think the Thunder are going to close this out, you ride the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander props. If you think Indiana's going to do this, probably without Tyrese Haliburton, I commend you. I like it. I respect it. And If you happen to be new to FanDuel, there's never been a better time to sign up. Head on over to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this very solace and depressing and sad edition of Locked On Oilers. And that's more for me than anyone just trying to cope, because this sucks. There's no other way to say it, man. This series, it was there. This Oilers team was better than last year's, and they only got to 6 games this year. They didn't have the power play and the penalty kill to make up the deficiencies like they did last year, and that's the difference between going 6 and 7 games. Sure, you could say the goaltending was a little bit worse. The Oilers without Zach Hyman, definitely not nearly as dangerous, I would say, as last year's group that had all the shorthanded offense. In particular, Connor Brown and Janmark stick out in my memory from 2024. But as we sit here right now, for me, the pyramid of culpability is what I'm workshopping. It's not the best of names. It's very like 2009 Bill Simmons mail column. But for my everydayers who spent December and January and February and March and April and May and June along for the ride, you heard me talk all year about the idea of the Oilers pyramid, their foundation for success. You know, like the food pyramid, the base, what you're supposed to have the most. That's Connor and Leon being 2 of the 5 best players in the world. That solves so many problems for you. The next level up, special teams. They were an elite team at both last year. This year, power play struggled in the Stanley Cup Final. Penalty kill was one of the worst we have seen in the contemporary NHL of any team to make the Stanley Cup Final. So that's a little bit worse. The depth scoring, because the depth scoring came on special teams last year, I don't know how much more blame I want to put this year than last, but this year's penalty kill was historically bad after last year's was historically great. On top of that depth question is goaltending, because we all know if it comes down to a Stuart Skinner or a Calvin Pickard in a do or die hockey game, the Oilers are dying. And I don't think Stuart Skinner had an atrocious series. I just don't think he's this caliber of goalie. He's not suited for the role he's in as the Oilers' bell cow goalie. And the highs are exciting. They're exhilarating. You know, 2 straight Western Conference Finals. He had really good series. In the Western Conference Finals, he swung 2 of those games to the Oilers. He was so great, the shutouts they had. But you sit here in this final, and down at the other end of the rink is Sergei Bobrovsky, who's got 2 Vezinas, 2 cups, and is undoubtedly a future Hockey Hall of Famer. And the secret to why Bob is so effective, even now at 37, his workload is manageable. This is not the Panthers team of 2 years ago that went to the Stanley Cup Final against Vegas and had some of the flukiest shooting percentage, power play, and save percentage of any team imaginable to get to a Stanley Cup Final. All those overtime games they won, just so many different coincidences along that path. And obviously the DNA of that Panthers team is very much present today. And they cited themselves before the game on the pregame. Matthew Tkachuk had said that it's so much different after having had won and lost, because you kind of have everything in the bank. And speaking of having everything in the bank, even without Zach Hyman, and in hindsight, a little bit foolish on my part, a little bit too much recency bias on my part after that Stanley Cup Final, but through the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, the Oilers' offense was tremendous. They had 4 lines rolling at 5-on-5 that were scoring goals, not just like controlling possession, but actively winning their minutes. But you have Zach Hyman break his wrist against Dallas on the Mason Marchment hit, and suddenly you don't have a second line anymore. You have 2 second liners and a third liner. You have an okay defensive third line and your fourth line. And look, I want to be fair. Florida is a very good defensive team. They have a tremendous goalie. The tremendous goalie doesn't have to do a whole lot. He only has to make a handful of plays every game. The Oilers did not have what they needed. They could not establish the offensive zone with any real consistency. And even when they did, they weren't able to do a whole lot. They really struggled to establish the offensive zone, to get to the cycle. And even on the few chances they did, they settled for pretty mediocre shots. A lot of Bouchard point shots. Bouchard led the entire series in shots on goal as a defenseman, which I think speaks to just how tight of defense Florida plays and there being so little room out there. And that's where this game was won and lost for me, because the Oilers, as tough defensively as Florida is, the Oilers had chances in this hockey game. And you get one of those, you don't know what that does for the complexion of if it's a 1-1 game, if it's a 2-1 game, if it's 3-2, whatever. You get one on the board, you get a little bit of a baseline. You get your feet under you and you have a chance. But the way the first Florida goal happens, the way the second Florida goal happens, the way the third Florida goal happens, you have those 3 goals consecutively. Okay, we concede another goal, we lose. Because we're not scoring 5 on Bob. Bob is too good of a goalie to get to 5. And when your offense is struggling, and I said this before and I'll say it again, losing the McDavid-Draisaitl overlap of the minutes 5-1 while this game was still competitive. I'm not sure if they were on the ice at certain points for those empty netters, but when you sit here and you think about what the Oilers needed to break their way if they were going to win tonight, win the series, they needed to have an elite power play or penalty kill. Last year they had both. And McDavid was a little bit better, 40-something points in 25 games as opposed to the 30-something he had this year, a real slouch. And look, I'll say this real quick. Connor McDavid's one of my favorite hockey players. This is undoubtedly a biased opinion, but he knows he didn't play well. He knows he needed to be better tonight, and he tried to play outside of himself a little bit, and that's why, at least in part, I feel he had a rough game tonight. He was trying so hard to make things happen, gaining the zone with speed, trying to set guys up, trying to get to dangerous areas of the ice to receive passes, and he felt the gravity of the moment, and he was pushing himself too hard. And he would never say that. Any professional athlete will say there's no such thing. I have to be trying my hardest. But when you are pressing that hard, you think about how much pressure you put on yourself just to do anything of significance in your day-to-day life. And that guy feels the entire burden of a hockey team, city, a province, a region of a province, all of us just as hockey fans, and the moment and feeling like, okay, I got to do this. If no one else does, if I don't do this, we're not doing this. And that level of pressure is a lot to absorb. And I felt him and Leon, they look clunky. I felt that was the first time in a long time I have seen a team frustrate Connor to that point where it's just it's nothing. And some of that is Florida's talent. Again, when you can roll a Gus Forsling, a Sam Reinhart, and a Sasha Barkov all on the same line, I shouldn't say on the same line, at the same time, overlapping, of course, defenseman forwards, not the same thing. I know. When you have that luxury of having that, and then you have that Marchand, Lundell, Luosterainen line, you still got Verhaeghe and Kachuk and Sam Bett, that is an obnoxious amount of forward talent. And the Oilers, as good as I felt their forward group was, even with the Hyman injury, you saw the difference. And again, like we said at the top, the margins aren't that big, but you spread out those margins line after line after line, it starts to accumulate a little bit and it becomes a lot more daunting. But we are going to take our second and final break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we're going to take some sweet, sweet copium and try not to make this hurt as much. Be right back on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And real quick, to be a bit of a sap and appreciative to the people who listen, who've reached out over the last few weeks, said thank you, you enjoy the show. Greatly appreciate it. You do this day after day after day in hopes you get a handful of those over the course of an entire season. So to get the ones I did, it meant a lot. I'm very appreciative of anyone who takes the time to leave feedback. Even if you're being a wise ass in the comments, I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video long enough to leave a comment, because ultimately this content cycle, this work, it is the best job there is. I would love to do nothing but this all day. And I hope that comes across at times, because I really genuinely, there is nothing better than, even after losing that unsatisfactorily, I am still here. I can laugh at myself a little bit. I can poke fun at myself, feel a little bit better, and know I'm going to fall asleep as soon as I am done recording. Because when you have days like today, I spent almost the entirety of my Tuesday clapping to myself, saying, dig the bleep in, lock the bleep in, let's go, let's go, let's go. And I made the edit I did set to the acapella Under Pressure. I mean, I could not have been more excited for tonight's game, because I genuinely thought they were going to do this. And I was banking that holy on McDavid and Draisaitl doing something special tonight, because you go back and you look at the 2 wins in this series, the plays to win the games in overtime. You sit here, you think about where the Oilers are at in comparison to last year. And there's going to be an entire 2 months of talking about the offseason and who goes, who stays, what do we do, what do we need. Right now, I want to speak to the inner romantic in your soul, because the romantic worldview has died a very slow and agonizing death at the altar of the irony-pilled and the nihilists who have infected and permeated every aspect of culture and life in general. But sports are the best thing about people. For all of the great inventions, all of the cures, all of the space travel, all the microchips, the fact, I don't want to get too caught on a sidetrack here. I love talking about history, if you couldn't tell, but you sit here and you think about this team and the guts they showed. You think about where they were 2 months ago, game 1 against the Kings, and look, moralizing, remember when, it's a low form of conversation, I understand, to the Tony Sopranos of the world, but you have to appreciate these moments, because now we have no hockey for the next 2.5 months. And then you're not going to watch any preseason games. I will, because I got a show to do, but you're not going to watch preseason games. And we're going to be doing this 4 months from now, second week of October, trying to figure out, okay, where are they better? Where are they worse? But for right now, I beg of you, I plead of you, recognize this moment, understand the burden and the responsibility the Oilers carry. They are one of the best franchises in this sport. They have the best player in the history of the sport. They have if I was doing the rankings, second best player in the history of the sport. They have the best European-born player of all time. They have as talented a team as they have had in the McDavid Draisaitl era, but they come across the one team 2 years in a row that's just a little bit better than them on the margins, and those margins accumulate game after game after game because there's a little bit less variance overall because these are such good hockey teams. But there's going to be all summer to talk about, well, can they get the McDavid extension done? What is Bouchard's contract worth? Is he overpaid? Is Bouchard going to be on Team Canada? Are they going to get a goalie? Are they going to trade for John Gibson? Who are they going to get? Are they going to replace both goalies? Do they need 2 new goalies? Do they need to get rid of Ekholm? Is Ekholm kind of washed? Is he coming off of an injury? There are just so many questions that we are going to ask ourselves over the next few months because we're going to miss hockey so much. And as much as I love doing armchair GM, I love trade machine, I love bargain bin shopping and free agency and restricted free agency, but hockey is the greatest game. And this is the hardest trophy to win in all of sports. And that's what makes it the best. And it has never been harder to win in the NHL today. You look at the monster teams that are able to be assembled year after year because you get those foundational pieces right. You have Barkov and Reinhart and Forsling and Verhaeghe and Bennett and Bobrovsky. And then you add a Nico Mikkola, you add a Nate Schmidt, you find Dmitry Kulikov after letting him go after having had drafted him. You line up your replacement for Aaron Ekblad by acquiring Seth Jones for a backup goalie that you weren't even sure how much you were going to use going forward. And you trade for Sam Reinhart and you trade for Sam Bennett and you find Verhaeghe and you find Forsling. All of those moves in augmentation of a special group. The Oilers, if they had a healthy Zach Hyman, if Evander Kane could stay out of the penalty box, if anybody who plays up to their ability, and that's what's going to stick with me. That, I think, is what's going to bother me. Last year, you come down to a best of 7, 1 goal, wins the cup after coming back from 3-0 down. I did not feel gypped. This year, a little bit, I feel gypped because the Oilers shot themselves in the foot over and over again. And those little mistakes, plus the deficit between these teams where Florida's a little more talented. And that means everybody on your team's got to be great. And when individual guys start to make mistakes, and as the series wore along, you saw that. You saw Brett Kulak really struggle for the first time all season in this final. You saw how good Wallman and Klingberg were together earlier in the playoffs. And in this series, both guys looked overmatched. And those are good skating defensemen. And Florida made them look slow. Florida won so many loose pucks. And you just have to sit here and think about it. And I don't know what the answer is here. I will be very curious to see if anyone has feedback for me in the comments, but can you, if you lose the Stanley Cup, still feel okay about that? Because there's a part of me, as the fan in me, that loves the guys on this team, some of the guys on this team, and just wants to see them succeed because it would mean so much to them. It would mean so much to the game. And then you just, it's one of those things where you have to appreciate how hard it is to get here. There are 32 teams. The Oilers were 31st of the 32. They were one away from being the last team standing for the second straight year. The margin a little bit bigger, and the Oilers have so much work to do, but you have the best player in the world. You have a Hart Trophy finalist. You have one of the 10 best defensemen in the NHL. As your foundation, that's going to keep you competitive. That's going to get you to the door of the playoffs. Then you add in the depth. You still have Ekholm. You still have Wallman, who'll be on the team next year probably. You have Nurse, who that's a question that needs to be answered. Is Evander Kane going to be here next year? Are they going to promote Matthew Savoie or Logan O'Reilly? The Oilers don't seem like the type of team that's going to be moonlighting guys in the top 6 until they need them. But there's so much time to worry about the future. And sometimes you do just have to let yourself savor these moments, even the bittersweet ones, even the unsatisfying ones, because this team, these memories, these games, this stuff happens. Those are moments in time where you can place where you were, what you were doing, who you were with, when Draisaitl scores that overtime game winner, when the Oilers even get to the Stanley Cup Final. And you sit here and you got to take it in, and there's so much time to complain and to whine. But for one night, try to let yourself take a deep breath. Try to fall asleep without staring at the ceiling for an hour. Like I almost certainly will. But at the same time, the Oilers will be back. Not in the Stanley Cup Final, probably not. That would be insane if they went to the final 3 years in a row. But the Oilers will play hockey again. There will be NHL hockey in the fall, and the Oilers will be back, and we get to do this magic carpet ride all over again. But there's so much to do in between now and then, because this is where you have to flex your chops as a creative and come up with unique ideas to keep your audience interested. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked on Oilers. I want to thank everyone that made Locked on Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL over on the Locked On NHL feed for the biggest stories going into the offseason. Like, where's Mitch Marner going to end up? Where's Sam Bennett, the Conn Smythe winner, going into free agency? Is he going to stay in Florida? Are the Leafs going to be in? Are the Oilers going to be in? And so much more. The fun is only getting started. I will see you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.